Welcome to Crimson Clues, where shadows hide secrets and silence reveals the truth. Every story is a puzzle, and every clue takes you closer to the answer. Subscribe now, join the hunt, and let the mystery begin.
Chapter 1. The Night of Two Bangs. Few sights in London are as effective at creating tension as a theater. 5 minutes before the curtain rises, one feels tempted to fidget. Even Poirot fidgets, albeit as Poirot. He does so with such economy that one feels the fidget was ironed and starched beforehand. He tapped his gloves on his hand before placing them in his lap, as if auditioning for the job of gloves. "Mon ami," he whispered, observing the gathering. It is a cross-section of the English soul, the clerk, the dogger, and the soldier on leave. The young lady who believes the magician will select her, and the gentleman who is willing to be duped but wishes to believe he is not. I declared that I am prepared to be surprised. I thought it was both generous and patriotic. We went to the D Theatre in Piccadilly to see Ambrose Vale. He, with the stern profile and faultless evening gown, attempts that most hazardous of entertainments, catching a bullet between his teeth. According to the program, Mr. Vale never spoke on stage, instead holding his audience with a commanding gaze that even coughs waited for their turn. The orchestra sprang to attention, the velvet curtain rose, and there stood Vale, tall and exact, with a woman by his side to keep him fascinating. Mrs. Vale, Leah, was one of those modern women who appeared to have emerged from a milliner's window, all slant and sparkle. The audience applauded with the same mistrust reserved for magicians and government ministers. The opening half of the program featured beautiful chicanery. Cards followed him as horses would a good colonel. Rings clinked together like forgotten wedding vows. Poirot nodded appreciatively as Leah levitated above a crescent of steel swords. He argued that the procedure is not admirable. It is the restraint to suggest more than you demonstrate. Voila, that's art. Then came the gun. I've always believed that firearms and amusement are as compatible as a vicar and a phonograph. Each undermines the other's argument. Nonetheless, the audience leaned forward. A stage worker carried a lacquered case on his shoulders as a confidence trick. Leah Vale prepared a sealed envelope. A middle-aged banker, with the sanctimony of a man who has discovered something to volunteer for, initialed the envelope and locked the weapon with a key shaped like a moral concept. Poirot whispered, "Observe the little rituals, the sealing wax, the envelope, and the respectable banker. It's the conjurer's prayer book." The bullet was marked and dropped into the pistol by the sharpshooter, Madame Valtana, a robust woman, with a look implying that if shooting failed, she might try governing. The pistol was pointed toward Vale. Vale's mouth opened, revealing a glimmer of theatrical dentistry. The orchestra stabbed the chord. Madame Valtana is fired. The bang was as hard as a brawl in a tiled room. Smoke curdled, and the curtain reeled. His figure appeared to blur for a brief period, but I dismissed it as a trick of the light. Then there was a second bang, smaller, peevish, and coming from somewhere other than the pistol itself. The stage hands froze like rabbits as they reconsidered their hobbies. "Mandure," Poirot replied quietly. Leah arrived at Vale with impressive promptness. The amazing magician was on one knee. There was no blood, which was encouraging, but his cravat was dusted with black. His right side, just beneath the ribs, revealed a scorched patch on the shirt, as if it had been kissed by an ill-bred candle. The crowd did what audiences always do when faced with the prospect of death. They applauded in case it helped. The curtain crashed down. A man behind me told his wife that it was all part of the performance, in a tone that indicated disapproval of acts. An usher appeared in our row, pale and sweating in equal measure. "Is there a doctor?" he cried out in front of the entire auditorium. Poirot stood up and stated, "There is something better. There is an order. Backstage is an education. It has a similar relationship to glamour as a butcher's yard does to a Sunday roast. Ropes hung in convincing loops. An abandoned mermaid tail sulked on a chair, and I walked through a smattering of sequins like a disappointed comet. Up close, Leia Vale exuded the cool of a hostess who refuses to let disaster cancel dinner. Ambrose Vale stood pale but upright, a hand pressed against his side where the shirt had burned. "It is nothing," he scrawled on a slate put into his hand by a stagehand, indicating that his famous quiet extended to emergencies. A flash charge mistimed. Pugh's gaze shifted to the scorch. He sniffed, as if catching the aroma of a wine he disliked. Cordite, he noticed, was not just the theatrical powder. Madame Volotana, the sharpshooter, had removed her earplugs and replaced them with righteous anger. "I loaded the blank myself," she said, as per rehearsal. "If there's danger, it weren't from my end." She had a sharp Midland snap in her voice that could staple paper. Mr. Edgar Pembroke, the theater manager, approached us with a waistcoat of heroic verticality. "Mr. Vale, are we all safe? Are we insured?" He also refined this. "Is everyone okay?" He had the appearance of a man used to walking quickly in the direction of money. As luck would have it, Inspector Graves was sitting 3 rows behind us, enjoying the performance in the manner of a man determined to resist enjoyment when the commotion drew him to his feet. He turned his head towards Poirot. "You again," he said, his resignation tinged with relief. "Always," Poe said cheerfully. Graves examined the pistol, which lay on a bay table like a completed statement waiting to be signed. Following rehearsal, the lacquered case was neatly sealed with a blob of red wax. I thought the seal was too perfect for something done in such a hurry. Graves unlocked the case with the banker's key, which rattled as if embarrassed. Inside the cleaned, polished pistol glinted with innocent malice. "Blank," said Madame Volotana, showing the spent cartridge. "See." She looked as if she would gladly shoot anyone who did not see. Poirot, while all this impressively official fuss occurred, drifted with the calm of a man who had paid for a ticket and intended to get his entertainment. He stooped, picked something from the floor with 2 fingers, and examined it on his palm. A tiny brass crescent no larger than a broken smile. "A crimp," he murmured, "from the casing of a cartridge. It should not be here if the cartridges are of the theatrical kind." He placed it on the green baize with ceremony, as if laying a wreath. Leia Vale watched him with eyes that were too steady. "Monsieur Poirot, I have heard of you," she said. "If my husband has enemies, they are professional ones, and we filed them alphabetically." She smiled in a way that made enemies seem not only plausible, but well organized. "Tonight was an accident. It must be." Ambrose Vale lifted his slate with some impatience. "No police," he wrote. "The show must continue tomorrow. Promise." Graves sniffed in a fashion that said the show would continue when he permitted it, and no sooner. "We'll see about that." I was not, I flatter myself, wholly useless. I had been kneeling near a curtain's hem, admiring in an abstract way the genius of English dust, when my fingers encountered a glove. It was pale gray kid and very small, and on the inside wrist there was a spot of soot in the shape of a comma. I presented it to Poirot with what I felt was a becoming modesty. He took it, raised an eyebrow, and then raised the other to keep it company. "Trebian Hastings, the glove is a lady's, the soot not of the stage lamps. See, it has the fine grit of the gun's flashpan." He turned to Madame Volotana. "Madame, your gloves." She produced a sturdy pair that looked as if they had been born with calluses. "Mine are here," she said. "I don't do kid." The word kid in her mouth sounded like a reprimand to juveniles in general. Then someone else handled the gun. I ventured with the zeal of a boy who has guessed correctly in geography. Or said, "Yoro, someone handled what the English would call the idea of the gun." Pembroke fluttered. "Really, Mr. Vale cannot afford scandal. There are investors. There's a new allusion to debut. The mirror inversion. There are clauses." "Clauses," repeated Poirot politely, as if discussing reindeer. "Tell me, Mr. Pembroke, who had access to the prop room after rehearsal?" "Why, no one," said Pembroke promptly. That is to say, the master carpenter, and Leia, and naturally Ambrose, and Madame Voltana, and myself and Solano, but apart from that, no one. Silvano, I said, the rival magician. I recalled a poster in the lobby showing a gentleman in a cape, suggesting by gesture alone that we were about to be overwhelmed. Pembroke colored slightly. We share certain facilities, economies of scale, you know. His smile tried to be worldly and succeeded at being nervous. Poirot put the brass crimp beside the gray glove as if assembling a very small picnic. We have the trace of a live cartridge and the mark of a lady's glove. We have a seal that is perfect like a forgery and a second bang that came from where? The waistcoat of Monsieur Vale. Or perhaps he indicated the wings where a faint scorch marred the velvet from a little surprise placed to misdirect. Are you suggesting, said Graves, that someone tried to shoot the man and also tried to make us believe they had not tried to shoot the man? Poirot beamed. Exactly. It is the most modern thing. How do you call it? The double bluff. The audience is educated. One must give them two deceptions for the price of one. Ambrose Vale, who had been listening with an expression of cultivated detachment, touched his side, frowned, and took the slate again. He wrote quite firmly, "We perform tomorrow." Layla closed her eyes for a fraction. "We do," she said aloud. Poirot first gazed at her, then at the glove, and then at the brass crescent. He lifted his forefinger. "Then, madame, please allow us to ensure that the bullet does not hit you first before it hits another." At this moment, a cat, who appeared to be employed by the theater as a vermin and morale inspector, padded through a tray of powder props, leaving a neat series of black paw prints across the green bay. Poirot observed them with interest. "Regarding the day," he said, "even the cat leaves a signature. Humans, however, are less orderly." He straightened, and the little gray eyes became very bright. "Come on, Hastings. We will examine a lock that was not opened, a seal that was not broken, and a pistol that was not fired." Nonetheless, they were demure. "Dash it, Poirot," I exclaimed. "How can we know anything if everything happened and nothing happened?" He tapped his temple, stating that this was the only reliable approach. We think, and thinking, I reflected, was the one trick that never failed to amaze, no matter how many times he performed it. Chapter 2. Guns, Grudges, and Gloves. I've suspected that police officers are born with a unique voice that is equal parts command and apology. Inspector Graves possessed an abundance of it. By the time he led everyone into the drafty passage behind the stage, he sounded like he was simultaneously arresting us and offering us a seat by the fireplace. "Now," he explained, "we'll have everyone offer their account in turn. Please no theatricals. Save them for paying consumers." Ambrose Vale immediately produced his slate and chalked, "I am uninjured." "There's nothing to say." Graves read this side and gazed at Poirot as if he were looking at an obstinate alien thing sent with the laundry. Poirot, of course, was thrilled. Hastings, the magician, is silent both on and off stage. C'est parfait. He is the oyster, and we must pretend to be pearl divers. I was going to say that Vale didn't appear especially oyster-like when Madame Voltana burst in with the indignant wrath of a woman who knows her guns. "I loaded the blank cartridge myself," she continued, holding the expended casing beneath Graves' nose. "Mark my initials right there, Mr. If that was live powder, I would eat my pistol casing." Poirot responded gently, "I would prefer that you do not, madame. It could give you indigestion, but who will shoot the blanks tomorrow?" Leia Vale gave a short, harsh laugh like a glass breaking. "My husband cannot afford another postponement. We'll be in Paris within a month. Contracts, advances, an empire of paper, and an inspector." She spoke as if contracts were adversaries to be defeated with proper posture. Mr. Edgar Pembroke, meanwhile, was fidgeting in a waistcoat so stiff it could have been lacquered. "Insurance Graves." "Excuse me, Inspector." Our investors will request a report. Graves mumbled, "If this was sabotage, there's always a clause." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "But of course, Mr. Pembroke, you run the firm. Then perhaps you can enlighten us. Aside from Madame Valentana, who else handled the pistol today?" "No one," Pembroke exclaimed too fast. "That is, aside from me to verify the lock, Mrs. Vale, who sealed the package, and Silvano. He had borrowed the case earlier to practice his own firearm illusion, but he stumbled under Piu's stare, as if pinned by a specimen jar. Silvano," I continued, "that fellow from the poster with the cape. Dashed a flashy-looking chap." Leia curled her lip as she remarked, "He's a rival. He's never forgiven Ambrose for inventing the mirror inversion illusion first." In terms of finances, she stopped just a hair too late. Poirot raised his brows in a perfect triangle. "Finances, madam. Ah, this is quite intriguing. It's always either money or heart, Hastings. But with conjurers, it is both, and they are equally fraudulent." Inspector Graves cleared his throat, like a church organ prepared to play a hymn. "We will write down everyone's names. Tampering with a firearm, whether against a rival or not, is attempted murder, and I will not have attempted murder treated as part of the curriculum." At this time, Ambrose Vale, who had been standing erect and pallid, reached for the slate again. He choked slowly. "No police. My show must continue." Then he emphasized it twice. Graves looked at this with professional distaste. "I can't just pack up and go home because your artist has a flair for drama." "No," Poirot said, "but maybe you may pack everything and leave because your suspect is not here." We all stared at him. Poirot's decision to dump his findings like sardines in a pond seemed pretty callous to me. "Explain yourself," Graves asked. Poirot grinned benevolently and cheerfully. "But not here, where dust settles and tempers flare. Let us adjourn. Madame Leila, could we borrow some of your husband's hospitality? A drawing parlor, possibly without powder or guns." Leia Vale paused, then cocked her head. "Our apartments are located over the theater. If you can put up with Russian-themed wallpaper, you are welcome." The Curtin apartments were as promised, Russian to the point of rebellion. There were velvet draperies that appeared to brood, gilt mirrors that reflected you in ugly moods, and a carpet deep enough to hide an army. Vale himself slipped into a recliner, eyes closed, as Leia poured sherry with the accuracy of a surgeon. Poirot declined cordially. I accepted happily. Graves stood with his hands behind his back, looking like a cop in a gallery, unsure whether to admire or arrest the paintings. Poirot fiddled with the glove and the tiny brass crimp he had picked up earlier, arranging them on the polished table as if serving dessert. "Regarding Mimi," he stated, "we have here the trace of a live cartridge and a glove that no one will admit to owning." "Very good. Someone intends to kill Ambrose Vale, but wants us to believe it was an accident. What is this telling us?" "That they mishandled it," I added, grabbing the opportunity. Poirot corrected them, saying they were clever. "A bungler shoots and flees, but in this case, the trick was tried within the trick. If Major Vale had perished, people would say, 'Ah, the bullet caught.' Something went wrong. Nothing more than a common mishap. It's part of the insurance package." "Hello, Mr. Pembroke." Pembroke had the hue of an overcooked shop. "I don't understand what you mean." "Pa," replied Poirot, smiling more sweetly than his words. "Of course you know. But you're not the only one. Madame Valentana insists on her blanks. Solano borrows the pistol casing. Madame Leia seals the envelope. Ambrose wears a veil and stands silently. Voila, a circle of suspects that is closed tighter than a conjurer's fist." Graves grunted. "So what do you recommend we do?" "Arrest everyone and hope someone confesses." Pooh shakes his head. "No, friend. We'll keep an eye on things. We will ask the questions no one wants to answer. Above all," he tapped his glove, We'll ask, who has a hand small enough to accommodate this? And the heart is big enough to pull the trigger. Later that night, when Poirot and I returned to Whitehaven Mansions, I sought to get a more detailed explanation from him. You don't believe Pembroke would try to assassinate Vale for insurance? Why not? Poirot inquired softly. It's an old story about money. But Hastings, it isn't only about money. Ambrose Vale prepares to unleash a new illusion, the mirror inversion. It's worth more than all the rubies on Barn Street. Controlling it may need a significant risk. Well, I reasoned, if Vale was so silent, he might not have told on the murderer anyway. I chuckled at my own joke. Poirot looked at me with warm reproach. Mon ami's silence is a costume, such as Solano's cape. Under it, the man speaks, walks, and makes his deals. One day, Hastings, you will overhear him. And then you'll tell me everything. You are the one who notices the small details. A glove in the dust and a whisper overheard. You are, how do you say, the accident that I planned in advance. I admit I was pleased by this, though I couldn't help but question whether Poirot's remarks were more flattering to himself than to me. The next morning, a note arrived via messenger. It was from Inspector Graves, written in a hand that appeared to have been trained to write. Caution before cat. I saw Silvano last night. Fellow denies all knowledge of the pistol. Says Vale stole his best tricks. Temperatures are high. Rehearsals at 2. Suggest you attend. Graves, who folded the note, smiled and declared, It begins, Hastings. The curtain rises on Act 2. And this time we shall not applaud merely. We shall listen. Chapter 3. The Illusionist Who Spoke. Rehearsal, it seems, is a word which, like economy, means different things to different people. To a conjurer, it appears to mean doing precisely the same thing repeatedly, whilst insisting that it is entirely different. When Poirot and I arrived at the Dare at 2 o'clock, the stage was a polite chaos. Ropes creaked, flats skated like embarrassed elephants, and a man loudly declared that a trapdoor could not be both where it was and not where it was, which I thought was an admirably philosophical position. Inspector Graves had set up a sort of headquarters in the property room, where he sat armed with a notebook and the expression of a man determined not to be impressed by anything cut in half. The afternoon was upon us. We'll observe the bullet catch again, only this time with my sergeant holding the cartridges, and no one so much as breathing on that pistol without permission. Madame Voltaire bristled. Permission? I don't need permission to sneeze. You do here, Graves said with a somber satisfaction. Ambrose's veil entered silently, just as it had the night before. The immaculate dress, the impassive face, had become a brand. Leia strided behind him with the quick glittering calm of someone who could balance the empire on a tray without spilling the gravy. Silvano the Magnificent loafed by the wings in a cape that appeared to be made of the word no, and Mr. Pembroke vibrated financially. Poirot made his rounds with pointed amiability, picking up and putting down, peering at the lacquered case, and to my surprise, complimenting Silvano's cape. He described it as frank, like a confession in velvet. Silvano was flattered. I'd return the compliment, Monsieur Poirot, but you appear to be dressed like a respectable bank manager. Ah, said Poirot, the safest disguise of all. Graves barked us to positions. The bullet catch in rehearsal was rather more distressing than in performance. The orchestra was replaced by a man with a clarinet who played as if arguing with his instrument, and the audience by 2 scene painters who watched with the mild cruelty of men on a tea break. Madame Voltaire displayed the blank cartridges to Graves, who initialed the paper packet in a way that made the paper feel accountable for itself. The pistol, unlocked by Graves's key, was loaded and set. A stage hand fetched a small bellows to puff away the smoke after firing. Someone else placed a bucket of sand in a prominent position, which did nothing for my nerves. Ready, Villana said. I braced myself. Vale stood like a monument erected to the virtue of not laughing. He opened his mouth with ceremonial distaste for the whole procedure. "Hold," said Graves suddenly. He glanced at Poirot. "Anything?" Who tilted his head bird-like. "Only that the sand bucket is 3 feet closer than last night." Graves considered, then nodded to have it moved back as though the bucket were a suspect of doubtful character. Volotana fired. The bang was the same indecorous crack as before. Smoke lipped. The bellows man huffed industriously. The scene painters nodded to one another as if the bullet had behaved in a satisfactory British manner. Vale performed the flourish with the marked slug. The packet was examined, and no one died. I exhaled in relief, which was greeted by the clarinet with a squeak of approval. Again, Graves said, "We did it again." The same, and once more, because policemen believe in repetition as an instrument of truth. By the third time, my soul had developed a nervous tic. "Very well," Graves said at last. "If anyone meant to kill him today, they've missed their matinee." In the lull that followed, Leia detached herself from a conversation with Pembroke and walked to the property room. Poirot was at that moment feigning interest in the clarinetist, and I, anxious to be useful, followed Leia at a discreet distance, which, in my case, is rarely discreet, and often a distance. She went up the small iron staircase that led to the upper corridors, a pretty little spiral that encouraged thoughts of romance and in practice produced stubbed toes. I paused at the landing where a narrow door stood ajar. Voices too. Leia's cool, precise, and a man's voice that did not belong to Pembroke, nor Graves, nor Silvano. It had a rougher edge, provincial, no American, with a twang that produced its vowels like a conjurer produces rabbits with confidence, but not subtlety. "Told you not to press him," the man said. "You press, he bolts." "I press because he dithers," Leia replied. "This patent is worth a fortune, and I will not see it tied to a name that cannot be used." "Then change the name." "You did it once." Yela's laugh was low and not a little cruel. "We changed more than a name. That was the point." I leaned as one does when the universe offers an ear trumpet. The door shifted obligingly, and I found myself looking into a small office whose general character was ledgers. Leia stood with her hand on the back of a chair. Opposite her by the window, Ambrose Vale. Ambrose Vale, not mute. Not adopting the sculpted stillness of a brand, but speaking. Speaking quickly in that same American burr that had betrayed him at his first words. "We stay the course," he said. "No police, no cut of the mirror. He can have the Paris dates. He can't have the trick." "He who?" Leela asked. "Solano or Pembroke." Vale's lip curled. "Odd to see it move at all. Pembroke's a coat with pockets. Solano's a thief with applause. And Graves? Graves is a clock. He ticks and talks. If you set him forward 5 minutes, he's in a temper for a week. He'll do what he does." Leia's hand tightened on the chair. "And me?" "You said Vale softer are the lady who smiles at lions and counts their teeth afterwards. Now I am not naturally a spy, but I am, I hope, an honest observer." It was clear as daylight that Ambrose Vale's vow of silence was not a vow at all, but a choice, a costume, a mask with a seam. He had not merely been silent on the stage. He had been pretending off it to be something other than he was English, perhaps when in fact he was American, or at least American of long practice. The accent did not lie. I withdrew, heart beating, and collided with a potted palm that had done me no harm. It retaliated by shedding half of Africa on my shoes. Leia's head turned, Vale's followed. I executed a retreat of such nonchalance that I could have been hired by the Foreign Office. "Anything of interest, Hastings?" Poirot's voice floated up from below. He had abandoned the clarinetist to his art and was regarding me with undue innocence. I descended with what I hoped was a soldierly tread and a face like a closed cupboard. "As a matter of fact," I said, and told him. He listened with the politeness he reserves for the universe when it agrees with him. "Tiens," he murmured. "So the silent idol is a man who speaks with the voice of another country. It is the little fracture in the statue that shows the marble is only plaster. Do you suppose he's hiding his origin?" I asked. "Why should he?" Poirot spread his hands. "Publicity, mon ami. A story sells the tickets. The Englishman who never speaks. The man of mystery from nowhere. Better, but there is more. It is the contracts. It is the patents. It is the question of who is Ambrose Vale when he signs the paper. If your name is a piece of theater, then a signature is an illusion too." This struck me as uncomfortably clever. "Is it legal?" "In England," said Poirot, "many things are legal that are not sensible, and many things are sensible that are not legal. We shall see." Graves, when informed in cautious terms, made a noise like a teapot that disapproves of boiling. "I don't mind a man pretending to be what he isn't," he said, "so long as he doesn't pretend to be dead before he is. But it gives motive a right old shove that it does. Names tied to patents, patents tied to pounds, pounds tied to—" He gestured at Pembroke, who took the gesture personally. We repaired to the property room, where Poirot requested, with great gentleness, to see copies of any patent applications relating to the mirror inversion. There followed a rummage by Pembroke that would have done credit to a fox in a library. Eventually papers emerged, theatrical, legal, and entirely fatigued. Poirot read with the absorbed patience of a man who enjoys commas. "Aha! The application is made by Ambrose Vale. Doiselden, London, but the provisional drawings are lodged by a certain Vale. Spelled with an I, care of a New York address." He tapped the letters delicately. "Some people, when they make a new life change only one letter, they think no one will notice. You see, Hastings, the mirror is not only on the stage." Pembroke fussed. "A clerical error. Surely a clerical error." "Of course," said Poirot. "So many crimes are clerical errors that have attended night school." Silvano drifted in like a cloud with a grievance. "I hear whispers," he announced. "And when there are whispers, there is Silvano. Because I cannot abide being left out of a secret." "Be at ease," Poirot told him. "You are in no danger of that." Silvano laughed and then with unsettling quickness turned to Vale. "Since we are all friends, how fair is the wound?" Vale raised an eyebrow and wrote on his slate, "How it amused me now that he chose chalk when he had a tongue. It will not interrupt my performance." "Pity," Silvano said silky. "It would improve mine." Graves's cough put an end to that. He shooed Silvano away with official dignity and a faint flap of the notebook. "Before we set anyone at anyone, Mr. Poirot, tell me what of that glove." Poirot lifted the glove delicately. "A lady's glove Perry made. Too small for some, too large for others." Leia's eyes, which had drifted to the window, returned. "I buy in Paris," she said calmly. "Half of London does." "Exactant," said Poirot, "which is why one does not throw away one's glove without noticing, unless one is in a hurry or one wishes it to be found." "And the brass crescent," Graves prompted. "From a live cartridge," Poirot said. "But none was fired this afternoon. Therefore, it is yesterday's trace or our assassin's. Either way," he smiled, "it is the sort of crumb I follow better than Hansel and Gretel." The rehearsal concluded with a minor catastrophe. The theater cat, pursuing a philosophy of its own, leapt onto the bay table, inspected the glove with feline disdain, and then sat directly upon the patent papers as if registering a claim. Leia rescued them. The cat purred as if satisfied to have signed. "Even the cat," Poirot observed, "understands ownership." By late afternoon, Graves had had his fill of harmless bangs and harmful paperwork. "We'll keep a constable at the door to the prop room and another at the stage door," he decided. "If our would-be murderer tries his second act, he'll find he's not on the bill." "Ah," said Poirot mildly, but the clever murderer writes himself onto the bill in invisible ink. We walked home through an air that smelt of rain and cigar ends. The streets moved at their usual London pace, brisk enough to prevent thought, slow enough to prevent arrival. Well, I said, we have learned that Ambrose Vale is not Ambrose Vale. We discovered that Leia buys high-quality gloves. Silvano is a snake in a cape, while Pembroke's waistcoat has clauses. And Poirot continued, we have learned that somebody cares very much who owns the mirror inversion. The pistol was supposed to make death appear to be an accident. But when death did not arrive on time, the tale had to change. We'll alter it for them. How? He smiled while asking the question that magicians despise. Why, not how? That is for children. Why are there criminals in Whitehaven mansions? He halted with the key at the door. One last thing, Hastings. You'll go for a short walk tomorrow before the evening entertainment. You'll listen with your ears. You'll look with your eyes. And he sparkled. You will stand in the corridor by the Russian wallpaper until a piece of conversation falls off the wall into your pocket. You suspect more to be overheard? I don't suspect. I encourage, he responded calmly. The truth, like a good rabbit, must be coaxed from the hat. And if nothing falls, he rubbed my shoulder, then I'll have to think. And that, mon ami, is my favorite trick. Chapter 4. The Locked Prop Room. There are few phrases that are sure to make a police officer square his shoulders. As if no one could have gotten in, Mr. Pembroke gave Inspector Graves this promise with the air of a man intent on taking it personally. The prop room door stood stoutly green, the brass hasp glittering, and the constable opposite, it was stiff as a chest piece. Graves announced last night, "This door has been locked. My soldier has stood vigil, and not a single feather has entered or exited." The constable verified this with a serious nod, as if his livelihood depended on it. Nonetheless, Pembroke quavered. Someone had been in the ammunition box. "Inspector, you must see." Poirot crouched over the lock with the precision of a surgeon checking for a pulse. He whispered, "First the eyes, Inspector. The hands follow." The key turned effortlessly. The air inside smelled like dust and old paint. Shelves sagged with crates labeled feathers, white feathers regrettable, and pigeons not to be fed. Trick tables sat around like guilty furniture. On a trestle sat a tin marked cartridges blank, tied with twine and sealed with wax like a dagger ant tucked up for the evening. "I sealed it myself," Pembroke said desperately in front of witnesses. Poirot leaned in, humming gently. "2 seals," he explained. "One pressed yesterday, then lifted aside. Another pressed today. Do you see the 2 sharp edges and knot? Ah, yesterday's square, today's reef. Even knots in theater are spectacular." Graves grunted, indicating that someone had been at it. "Exact mint." Poirot breathed warm air on the seal, loosening the twine and revealing the packets inside. Most were innocent enough, but one had a neat slit. He opened it and took out a cartridge. "Observe, Hastings. The crimp has been forced and smoothed again. A plug was inserted where only waiting was supposed to occur. When fired from close range, it scorches. It kills when fired at close range." Madame Volotana arrived with her arms folded, like a general marshalling troops. "Not mine," she retorted. "I loaded from the inspector's packet." Poirot gave a wink. "Perhaps, but this knot has been tied by hands familiar with ribbon, not rope." He approached the small window. The bolt was drawn, and the sill was slightly smudged with soot. Voila, a locked room that opens. To the constable's horror, he demonstrated with neat precision how a loop of string, a twitch, and the bolt yields. On the floor, he discovered a rosin grain and a smear of powder. Rosin for grip, Inspector, an acrobat, a fencer, or a shooter, and powder, fine and gritty, from the flash of a live round. Pembroke dabbed his forehead. Surely an accident." "No," Poirot said firmly. A preparation. The pistol lay in its lacquered case like an ornament with a guilty conscience. Poirot lifted the barrel, peered through, and withdrew a narrow metal sleeve. Aha! Cheap work. Too tight at one end, too loose at the other. Safe for blanks, but a live round. It spits heat sideways. Thus the scorch upon Mio's shirt. Pembroke winced. The maker's sleeves are expensive. We economize it. Economies, said Voltana tartly, are why things blow up. At that moment, the theater cat strolled in with the assurance of one who pays no rent. It leapt to the sill, inspected the powder, then paced across the trestle, leaving neat black paw prints directly to the pistol case. Having considered the sleeve, it sneezed thunderously over Pembroke's paperwork and sat down to wash. Pooh bowed. Even the cat, Inspector, has traced the path of our assassin. Poirot reached into his pocket and placed the small gray glove beside the tin. Do not forget this, the glove we found. A lady's glove, Palisade. Too small for some hands, too large for others. Dropped in haste or placed with intent. That, Inspector, is the riddle within the riddle. At that moment, Lia Vale appeared cool as ice. If you intend to hang this on me, Miss Poirot, do hurry. Suspense bores me. Poirot bowed. My dear Madame, suspense is the theater. Without it, the audience goes home sober. Her smile was thin, but her eyes glittered. She swept away, leaving a silence more eloquent than words. Graves rubbed his temples. What now? Now, said Poirot, we prepare for our assassin to betray himself. Tomorrow's show must go on, but we will change the stage upon which he plays. Graves grunted. And if he doesn't take the bait, Poirot's mustaches twitched. Then I shall take it for him. Chapter 5. The Encore and the Curtain. If there is one thing I have always prided myself upon, it is my ability to obey orders. Pooh insists that I frequently misunderstand them, but that is a slander. I obey exactly as instructed, only perhaps with additional flourish. My duty for the evening was simple. Watch the bellows man and cough if anything untoward occurred. I took the matter seriously. One does not improvise coughs in a crisis. Before we left Whitehaven Mansions, I tried out 3 versions upon Poirot: the Gentile drawing-room cough, the cavalry cough, and a mighty bronchial roar that rattled the teaspoons. Poirot considered gravely. The second Hastings, he said. It has dignity, yet urgency. It suggests a ton, Madame Ziegler. Catastrophe approaches, but with refinement. Thus armed with my bronchial weaponry, I accompanied him to the Dare Theatre for the second night of Ambrose Vale's perilous bullet trick. Inspector Graves awaited us. The lacquered pistol case hugged under one arm like a newborn he suspected of perjury. His mustache bristled with anticipation. No funny business tonight, he said. We used the twin pistol. Voltana loads from my packet, and no one so much as breathes on a cartridge without my permission. Ei, Poirot murmured. With magicians there is always the funny business. We merely ask this evening that it be theirs, not ours. Backstage bustled with what I can only describe as strained normality. Stage hands whispered as though gossip itself might explode. Madame Voltana stood square-shouldered, cheeks like gunmetal, looking as if she had been born in command of artillery. Lia Vale swept past in black satin, leaving a faint perfume of authority. Ambrose Vale appeared immaculate, as though pressed by angels, though his pal suggested he might faint gracefully at any moment. Poirot naturally busied himself with a series of alterations that baffled me. He adjusted the sand bucket 2 inches. He whispered to the clarinetist, who scowled deeply and nodded. He tapped the bellows device before tapping me. He reminded Hastings that if the bellows man dreams about his food rather than the smoke, he will cough. I fixed my tie. You may rely on me. The opening part of the show was met with enthusiastic applause. Cards multiplied, rings danced, Leia levitated, and the audience cheered as if the absence of gunshots was a victory. Poirot watched with twinkling eyes at each flourish, making short approving noises only when a trick was extremely clever. Then came the bullet grab. Graves oversaw Volana as he opened his first envelope. She loaded the twin pistols, her movements quick, as if daring fate to twitch. The colonel in the front row, drafted from the audience, initialed the envelope holding the indicated slug, with a scowl that suggested he would have preferred to initial Germany. Leah Vale finished it with beautiful accuracy. Ambrose Vale moved forward, her lips parted with the hesitant majesty of a duchess approaching merchants. The clarinet played its note. Volotana is fired. The impact caused the air to split. The clarinetist arrived slightly late, having followed Poirot's hidden instructions. Smoke curled. The bellows man blinked, and I coughed my cavalry cough so hard that he nearly fell over, puffing. And then nothing. There was no second blast, and the wings did not flash. Only Ambrose Vale held up the indicated slug with cold composure, and the audience erupted in applause. They yelled, convinced that quiet was the most effective deception of all. They stamped. One woman in the stalls fainted with pleasure. However, Poirot did not applaud. His attention went left. A slender curl of smoke revealed itself near the wings. Graves, seeing this, bounded like a terrier. There was a scuffle, the unmistakable sound of someone discovering that a police officer had him by the wrist, and the audience, assuming this was also part of the entertainment, applauded louder than ever. When the curtain lowered, Graves emerged, grabbing Mr. Edgar Pembroke. The manager's waistcoat had succumbed completely, and his face was as pale as Blancam-G. Graves's hand held a charred string with a wooden toggle. His other fist clutched Pembroke's sleeve, which was heavily dusted with soot. So, Graves explained coldly, our second bang wasn't the pistol at all. It was this gentleman tugging his little toy in the wings, Pembroke said, quavering. Merely an accent, Inspector. Theatrical business heightens the drama. Heightens the insurance payout, more like Graves cracked. Back in the property room, the evidence was displayed like a gallery of guilt. The flashpot and cord, the slit packet, the resealed tin, and the glove. Graves surveyed it with pleasure. Right, that is our manager's appointment. But I bet there's more. Bienseer and Poirot agreed. He lifted the cartridge with a suspicious crimp. This is tampered. A plug was inserted, disguised as waiting. It would scorch at close range and kill it closer, but tonight it couldn't shoot since we altered the pistol. He turned sharply to Volotana. Madame, please tie this string. She grabbed it with her fingers quickly and created a reef knot as neat as needlework. Poirot held it up. Voila. The same knot that linked the tin also served as a hand signature. And we recollect the Parisian-made glove. A lady's glove. A lady's knot. They speak together. Volotana's lips thinned. So I make neat knots. Is this a crime? No, Poirot replied gently. But spiking cartridges makes Pembroke's voice crack. She made me. Volotana rounded on him. You in the clauses. I would have had a clean patent. But no, you wanted insurance, papers, investors, and money, and you messed up the timing. The clarinet botched it. Pembroke wailed. Poirot smiled. No, monsieur. I bungled it for you. A fraction of syncopation and the double bluff collapses. You pulled the string, Madame tied the knot, and poor Ambrose Vale nearly died between the two of you. Ambrose Vale had remained curiously still throughout. Now he wrote on his slate with deliberate chalk. The show must continue, and for the first time he smiled, not theatrically, but almost boyishly. Leah Vale laid a hand on his shoulder. Thank you, Poirot. You have saved my husband and my contracts. Poirot bowed. The contracts, madam, will always take care of themselves. It is the husbands that require assistance. Graves snapped his notebook. Enough. Both of you, Pembroke and Railton, down to the yard. We'll sort your stories later. And Silvano? I asked. Poirot shrugged. He is guilty of vanity. Mon ami, not of bullets. His cape may be criminal, but his conscience is not. As the constables led them out, Pembroke muttered about misunderstood art, Volotana about betrayed genius. Poirot merely twirled his mustache, which had more dignity than either. Outside, the night air was cool and forgiving. The theater cat followed us to the steps, sat, and looked up with an expression that clearly said, "I solved it first." "Remarkable creature," I said. "Yes," Poirot agreed. "He saw everything and explained nothing. A perfect colleague." "Then perhaps you'll retire and let the cat take over," I teased. Poirot patted my arm. "No, Hastings. Cats cough too seldom." Music, and so concludes Poirot and the Magician's Last Trick, a tale of illusion and deception, where the smoke of theater concealed the sharper smoke of a pistol. And Poirot proved that the neatest stagecraft could not hide the truth. This story was written by us in homage to Agatha Christie, inspired by the real-life conjurer Jung Ling Soo, whose final performance ended in tragedy. Our telling is of course entirely our own invention. If you've listened until the end, then you are the reason these mysteries continue.